the race for second is hotting up.
It's really interesting, Tom. And, who's going to be the official opposition? Who's going to hold their feet to the fire? Who's going to challenge whoever wins the next election? And of course, arguably, they're going to be speaking for a huge chunk of the population who didn't vote for them. So it is a really important role. And it obviously depends what they're trying to achieve as a party opposition. Are you trying to dump rubbish on the current government and just slag them off? Are you trying to inflict government defeats? Are you trying to actually shape government policy? Are you trying to influence what the government are doing and actually changing the laws that are coming in? So whoever it will be will have to think very hard about what their strategy is. And obviously, as well, you're going to be working with potentially several new MPs in the case of people like the Liberal Democrats, who you say are on track to make gains. If you're Nigel Farage's Reform Party, obviously they want to be the party of opposition, but he is probably going to find it pretty hard. Obviously, a seasoned campaigner with what he does, he'll have no qualms about using his voice to amplify his anti-establishment message and fighting for the right. But is he going to be too preoccupied with trying to take over the Conservative Party and potentially what that might look like, rather than holding the Labour Party's feet to the fire? And arguably the Conservatives, they are potentially, if they do lose the election, they could be going into a leadership contest if Rishi Sunak does stand down. Are they going to be sort of taking their time to think about what they've done, a little bit of time on the naughty step potentially to think about that? And again, will they be in a position to effectively unite together to hold a potential Labour government to account? And obviously Reform, a new party, they've not got the resources, the press teams, the staff that the Liberal Democrats arguably have, and they have done quite well for the last few years. They regularly, get out stories to us in the media very well. They put in FOIs, they're in Parliament holding people's feet to the fire, putting in urgent questions. All of this stuff requires an apparatus amongst a political party, and arguably the Liberal Democrats, even though they have been probably not the real opposition for the past few years, could potentially be in the best position to become that real opposition.
To what extent, and this is all subjective, of course, and subjective opinion is very difficult for you to do during a general election campaign, but I'll ask the question anyway. To what extent has the Liberal Democrat campaign rather sunk under the radar, not just in terms of what they're saying about what they would do, but perhaps the people involved with it?
Yeah, and look, we haven't potentially, as the media, maybe we haven't been holding Ed Davey's feet to the fire as much as possible, because it's easy for us all to laugh about him being on a log flume and flying around on the teacups. But arguably it's because they've obviously not been doing so well in the polls in the last 5 years since they've come out of coalition government. Their number of MPs has dropped. They've not had the same amount of sort of a shape in British politics as they did once before. But arguably that could all now be changing with the amount of seats they're expected to get. The latest MRP poll has them potentially able to gain 37 seats up to around 48. And that's sort of nearly Nick Clegg levels in sort of 2010, 2015.
As you say, politics is all numbers. So we'll wait and see what the real numbers shake out to be. But some of the polls suggest that Lib Dems could have more seats than they've had in their history, certainly very recent history, and be the official opposition.
Yeah, and that's definitely a potential. And like I say, maybe Ed Davey is due a little bit more of a shine on his policies. But some of them have stood out. I think there's caring package, the NHS package that he laid out, obviously the manifesto that we saw from him him and the Liberal Democrats last week. He did sort of lay out what he believes is the potential policy for government. I think he's not quite on the Joe Swinson-esque level of I'm going to be the next Prime Minister. He knows that. He's not making that case. But in terms of when you're comparing them to the Conservative Party, I think they're in a much better place, arguably, to really hold Labour's feet to the fire. It's interesting what you say about the Liberal Democrats and position on Brexit, and potentially would having them as the official opposition push the Labour Party towards a much closer relationship with Europe. We heard from Ed Davey last week, that's exactly what he wants to see. And I'm sure we'd be hearing for the first time potentially in maybe 5 years in the Commons, voices arguing for that closer relationship with the EU again. And that'll be really interesting to hear the opposing voices, Nigel Farage potentially, or Conservative MPs, Penny Mordaunt, Kemi Badenoch, James Cleverly, whoever might take up the mantle if Rishi Sunak steps down, making the case for not. So yeah, it could be a really interesting time to be in opposition.